Welcome back. Let's continue from our last video. A very special flight gently touched down at the airport and immediately filled the air with a buzz of excitement. A large crowd had gathered, waiting eagerly near the arrivals gate. Among them, a young girl full of wonder leaned towards her friend and whispered that a famous person must be arriving. She pointed at the many busy reporters and flashing cameras, feeling quite certain about her guess. Her friend, however, offered a knowing smile and corrected her gently. He explained quietly that it was not a famous person but hunters arriving, specifically members of the Hyunmu Guild. The girl looked surprised, admitting she had never heard of them, and asked, puzzled, why hunters would arrive at the airport. The friend explained that he had been reading articles which reported they had been invited to the United Kingdom because of a dangerous and particularly difficult incident involving a portal. Just then, the reporters suddenly surged forward, shouting questions with eager voices. A woman named Woo Hyein stepped into the airport area. The reporters asked about her feelings after successfully clearing a city earlier that morning and mentioned a large sum of money she had reportedly received from the British government. Woo Hyen's assistant quickly stepped closer, attempting to shield her from the overwhelming press, who pressed even harder, asking if she believed the top 3 guilds in their country could compete on the world stage. The assistant, speaking clearly, stated they would not be giving interviews at that moment, but promised to answer questions later at a proper press conference. As Woo Hyein and her team walked away, the young girl commented that the leader of the guild had seemed incredibly capable and strong. Inside the car, the assistant briefed Woo Hyein on her schedule for the week. She mentioned that Hyen's schedule until tomorrow had been emptied for now, and the day after tomorrow she had a group interview with the representatives of the Sanha Guild at 11. She also added that they had found hints suggesting the executioner had been in the area just 2 days before. Woo Hyein looked surprised by this information. The assistant provided more details, explaining that 2 days prior, in a strange, error-ranked dungeon located in Bupyeong, the person monitoring the area had seen someone show up later than the others. This individual precisely matched the descriptions provided in reports about the executioner. Furthermore, the Hunter Association had confirmed that 2 people had managed to survive that particular incident. Woo Hyein then examined some basic information about the survivors displayed on a tablet. She saw a registration number, the name Shin Junseoh, and his assigned job as a support hunter. The assistant added that the 2 survivors consisted of a B-class assassin and a D-class support. Woo Hyein felt a significant wave of surprise and disbelief wash over her. She wondered aloud how a D-class support could possibly survive an encounter with the executioner. She also inquired about the B-rank assassin's specific skills, but the assistant admitted they did not have detailed information. Both survivors, the assistant noted, had simply claimed that their companions died by accident, which was a risk everyone knew came with any hunt. Woo Hyein thought deeply about the peculiar situation, feeling a growing sense of unease. She considered the few possible explanations that seemed plausible. Perhaps the survivors were secretly collaborating with the executioner, or maybe they had been coerced or frightened into taking actions to ensure their own survival. Feeling a strong desire to hear their story directly, she instructed her assistant to add a meeting with both survivors to her already busy schedule. Meanwhile, the main character, Shin Junseoh, found himself back home and let out a deep sigh. He still felt a sense of disbelief, truly surprised that he was still alive after everything that had transpired so far. Just as he had anticipated, searching through the Hunter Association's records for anyone using a great sword yielded no results whatsoever. 2 important conclusions became very clear to him in that moment. First, he was definitively an unofficial hunter, operating outside the known system, and second, his usual appearance was now different, strongly suggesting he was employing some kind of disguise or transformation. The only certainty he possessed was his connection to the horrible event where many had died within those wrongly ranked and unknown dungeons. Even the strange existence of these error dungeons might have originated from the shadowy organization he seemed linked to. He thought about the terrifying situation at the mansion involving Beth, realizing with a heavy heart that everyone present there, including Yoon Taehyun, could easily have been wiped out. He remembered Aok's unique and distinct way of fighting and felt a pang of worry. He knew that everyone present that day held the potential to become important heroes in the future, regardless of their current personalities. Their deaths would undoubtedly represent a terrible loss for the world's future hope. He closed his laptop, and the thought settled in that the continued concealment of real dungeon ranks and the act of sending assassins, especially doing so separately from organized dungeon hunts, suggested that those assassins might be operating outside the standard dungeon system. This felt like a clear sign of a bigger, more spread-out danger. As he contemplated these troubling matters, his phone rang. He answered it and was immediately taken aback by the voice speaking on the other end. The voice inquired if he was Shin Junseoh, and a short time later, he found himself inside a large, fancy building. He was sitting in a beautiful bar where Kang Yuan was waiting for him. She greeted him, looking him over critically, and remarked that his clothes were less than formal. She questioned, in a subtle manner, if she was expecting too much from him given the elegant surroundings and delicately asked if his clothes were as clean as they possibly could be. The protagonist felt a prickle of annoyance and countered firmly that he had never visited places like this before and had no intentions of doing so in the future. He expressed his growing suspicion because his home address and phone number should not have been easily obtainable from the association's records. Yurin questioned playfully why he was bringing up his address, wondering aloud if Aok, whom she referred to as that fool, had been chasing him. Understanding dawned on Shin Junseoh as she offered a smile that felt both unpleasant and confidently knowing. Then she deliberately and charmingly reached out for his hand. She calmly told Shin Junseoh not to concern himself with such heavy-handed tactics from that fool. She stated clearly that her invitation was simply due to her own personal interest, wondering if he was there because he was interested in her or if the meeting was strictly about business. She invited him to sit down properly and graciously offered to pay for their drinks. Shin Junseoh firmly stated that their conversation was not suitable for casual drinks. He explained that if she did not have a specific reason for meeting, he would prefer they proceed directly to the point. Yurin confirmed she did indeed have an interest. She explained that she had been unconscious at the very end of their last encounter in the dungeon and therefore had not witnessed how it concluded. Remembering Beth, who was so cunning and strong, she asked him, full of curiosity, how he had managed to defeat such a monster. She even suggested that Taehyun, even at his strongest, might have found it a difficult task. He gently redirected her question back to Taehyun himself. He repeated that he was merely a D-class support hunter with no actual fighting skills. He insisted that since he had been unconscious, he had been completely helpless. He had only managed to gather enough energy to create just one single sword, and that was the entire extent of his assistance. Yurin smiled mischievously, claiming she understood everything perfectly. Then she probed further, asking what else he wanted to share with her. They spoke briefly about recent events, and Yurin commented, finding it strangely funny despite how unbelievable it seemed, about the image of a weak, seemingly insignificant person wielding a huge sword and going around hunting other hunters. She even joked playfully about the possibility of becoming his next victim. Shin Junseoh countered seriously that if his guesses were correct, their entering a wrongly classified dungeon meant she was indeed the primary target. She was the only hunter present who did not belong to a guild among everyone who had entered. Yurin interrupted him, confirming that she understood his point. They would target her first, the one without organizational protection. She admitted this sounded very likely but asked if he might be overlooking something important. She pointed out that if they were discussing vulnerability, she was not the only one there. She highlighted his own status as a D-class support, unconnected to any group or guild, and possessing abilities far weaker than her own. She questioned if his own safety was not in just as much danger if his theory held true. She then made a tempting, almost playful offer, asking what he thought about her potentially protecting him if he desired her assistance. Junseoh, however, simply stood up to leave. He stated that he had already explained what he needed to convey. He urged her to take his words very seriously, emphasizing the real and genuine danger to her life. She watched his figure walk away and gradually fade into the distance. Then she made a phone call, telling the person on the other end that Junseoh had just departed. She instructed the recipient to try their very best, framing it as an opportunity to repay a debt owed, all while a small, mischievous smile played on her lips as she contemplated the unfolding events. Shin Junseoh walked down a street that was only slightly lit, feeling completely alone in the quiet night. Suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks. The executioner's voice shattered the silence, asking if it didn't feel strange that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Shin Junseoh claimed not to know who he was but acknowledged the executioner's courage, admitting he hadn't expected him to be walking around alone at night, so soon after their last meeting. The executioner then looked at him with clear disdain, questioning if Shin Junseoh was truly just an idiot. Feeling irritated, the executioner stated bluntly that attempting to run or scream would be utterly useless. He assured Shin Junseoh that he might not have felt it happen, but he was already caught, explaining that they were now located inside something called dark territory. The executioner revealed there was a priestess positioned on a nearby rooftop and praised the sorceress who had created the barrier, saying she was very talented. He asserted that as long as the barrier remained active, no one outside would know what transpired inside, whether Shin Junseoh or the executioner died, leaving no trace of the events. Shin Junseoh listened calmly to the executioner's explanation. Then, with a surprisingly lack of concern, he commented that the barrier was not entirely a bad thing. He asked if it functioned by creating a fake space that appeared entirely real. He admitted that apart from the polluted mana he could distinctly feel, his inability to sense anyone else's presence nearby caused a slight feeling of worry. He had initially feared the executioner had killed everyone living in the area, and he now felt relieved that this was not the case, noting that even with their abilities, his own organization possessed a certain level of awareness. The executioner looked visibly confused, questioning the strange, illogical nature of Shin Junseoh's words, but the protagonist interrupted him again. He asked directly if the executioner planned to attack now. He stated that he had somewhat anticipated being hunted, acknowledging that it might happen that very day, remembering his recent conversation and farewell with Yuran and her comment about him being the perfect target. The executioner gritted his teeth in pure rage, asking how a simple support hunter, someone supposedly incapable of fighting alone, dared to speak such bold words. He drew his sword and immediately unleashed a powerful, sweeping strike, sending out a massive blade of fire towards Shin Junseoh. He shouted, demanding how a useless support hunter could talk so much while pretending to be strong, as the enormous and powerful fiery blade sped towards Shin Junseoh, who stood completely still. Upon impact, a significant explosion of mana erupted, lighting up the space with brilliant light. After the blast cleared, the executioner stared in utter disbelief. Shin Junseoh, standing before him, was wielding a massive sword that had effectively blocked the attack, and it was glowing intensely with mana. The executioner was stunned, realizing this was not just a simple defense like their previous encounter. He noted that most people trained in combat would have already been killed by such an attack. The protagonist calmly lowered his sword, stating it was the first time that year he could face an enemy directly without worrying about people watching, since the battle with the ice monster was still clear in his memory. The executioner, filled with renewed rage, launched a furious attack, swinging his sword wildly and without restraint. He asked why a support hunter, someone who couldn't act alone, was acting like he was so important. The protagonist countered calmly that he was not entirely wrong and told the executioner to see the truth with his own eyes. Shin's eyes glowed intensely with mana as he activated his special skill, Grid World. At the exact same moment, a car arrived nearby, and Wu Haiyan stepped out. She looked around the area carefully. Everything seemed calm and quiet on the surface, and she couldn't see any physical signs of a portal, but she could clearly and distinctly feel the polluted mana in the air, a pervasive feeling of wrongness. Wu Haiyan, who was a Saint-class hunter, a rank above average for support hunters, usually utilized both normal mana and a special energy called Divine Energy, which was known to be the direct opposite of polluted mana. This meant that while some Saint classes might not be sensitive to regular mana, they could certainly sense divine power, and by extension, its opposing force. Wu Haiyan's assistant asked if they should report the strange phenomenon to the association, saying it felt unusual and dangerous to have such strong polluted mana present in a residential area. But Wu Haiyan refused for the moment, stating they would wait. Preparing her staff, she began walking steadily towards where she sensed the barrier, instructing her assistant that if she did not return or contact them within 30 minutes, they should report the situation immediately. She channeled mana into her staff, making it glow brightly as she got closer to what appeared visually like a normal wall. The assistant watched, seeing only a typical wall, but her guild leader clearly felt something powerful and significant there. Suddenly, the assistant nearly cried out in surprise as Wu Haiyan walked straight through the wall, as if it did not exist at all. The street then became completely silent. The assistant was left feeling utterly bewildered, unable to see her leader or even feel her presence in any way. She started to worry deeply, hoping intensely that nothing terrible was happening inside the mysterious barrier. Inside the barrier, a fierce and intense battle was raging with full force. Flashes of mana and loud explosions filled the confined space. Shin Junseoh's strong and powerful blades flew through the air towards the executioner, who managed to block many of the strikes, though at times he barely managed to dodge weapons arriving from multiple directions at once. He angrily called Shin Junseoh an idiot for using tactics he considered pointless, all while quickly moving to avoid a grenade thrown directly at him, only to turn and find another grenade miraculously appearing right behind him. The 38 mana grenade, a type often used by the military against dangerous monsters, went off with a blinding flash and a deafening bang. The protagonist watched the bright explosion calmly and continued the process of creating more weapons without hesitation. Meanwhile, the priestess watched him intently, trying to understand his true underlying strength. She thought to herself that if even the Empress, a being of considerable power, bowed to him, he must be someone of significant importance, someone who could potentially be very troublesome. She thought his weapons themselves seemed unremarkable, simply possessing qualities of strength and sharpness, characteristics that were only useful when actually employed in combat, meaning their creation focused simply on making them physically formidable. She observed Shin Junseoh surrounded by a huge number of spears and swords, finding it unbelievable that the person creating the weapons didn't just throw them randomly. but launched them with such amazing accuracy and sheer force that the executioner was visibly struggling, desperately swinging his sword to deflect the endless torrent of attacks. The sheer speed at which they flew, the unexpected angles they came from, the immense power behind them, and the perfect accuracy of the weapons were so precise that even a hunter as experienced as the executioner was finding it incredibly difficult to cope. Furthermore, he was creating firearms and seemed to know exactly how and when to use them effectively in battle. This suggested he was far more than just a skilled creator. It strongly implied he possessed combat experience at a veteran level to utilize his abilities in such a devastating way, yet despite being so formidable, this person remained hidden from the wider world. Amidst the cloud of mana dust that lingered in the air, the executioner coughed weakly. Shin Junseoh calmly remarked that while mana bullets were not very effective against monsters above C rank, humans were different. Their strength and how much damage they could withstand varied a great deal, especially when hit by a surprise attack. He added that he didn't even want to imagine the terrible results if someone were to be hit directly by such an attack. The executioner stood completely covered in blood, barely managing to stay on his feet. The protagonist stated that he himself had gone through similar terrible situations and wondered if the man would finally decide to give up the fight. But despite his obvious and painful wounds, the executioner snarled fiercely, showing his teeth in clear defiance, and called him a disgusting bastard. In response, the protagonist calmly explained he had only asked out of simple politeness. At that precise moment, the executioner turned his head and saw a huge number of daggers hanging ominously in the sky beside him, all pointing directly at him. He found himself in a truly awful and inescapable situation, with swords rapidly falling from every direction simultaneously. Shin Junseoh clenched his fist, and instantly all the swords shot down towards the executioner with tremendous speed and force, creating a massive explosion accompanied by brilliant flashes of light. The protagonist shielded his hand instinctively from the sudden wind and dust, but then he looked up in surprise. A figure was still standing before him through the aftermath. The executioner dropped his sword, and his hand began to twist and change in a horrifying and unnatural transformation. The priestess then cast a spell on him from afar, stating that she had to step in, even though it was not a course of action she preferred to take. She added with a hint of disapproval that her colleague was clearly in danger, making it necessary for her to provide assistance. She regretted not having gathered more information beforehand to prevent this difficult situation from arising, acknowledging she might have aimed too high with her initial plans, but she expressed hope that he could still manage to survive the current predicament. The executioner's hand had now completely changed into a huge blade with a dangerously sharp point. To defend himself against this new threat, Shin Junseoh quickly created an equally enormous sword made of mana. He found it suspicious that the executioner's severed right hand had previously seemed unaffected but suddenly showed such high levels of polluted mana. Despite his brief moment of hesitation, he attacked decisively, sending his mana sword rushing towards the executioner. However, the transformed hand swung with incredible force and the blade made of polluted mana easily sliced through Shin Junseoh's mana sword, cutting it cleanly in half. The protagonist watched the monstrous blade coming towards him in shock, but managed to quickly create a shield of mana, which absorbed the full force of the attack. Soon after, the shield broke apart under the strain. The priestess commented from afar that this was not going to be an easy fight. Simply creating strong weapons would clearly not be sufficient against this new power. While acknowledging that the protagonist definitely possessed impressive skills, she was surprised to see him pull a strange item from his pocket. It was a gift from Hazu, given during their meeting as a reminder of his agreement with the guild leader, who had heard that Shin Junseoh was looking for valuable items within Arcane's territory. The protagonist looked at the gift in surprise, finding Arcane's bloodstone inside the small box. This stone held Arcane's final, piercing screams, and if used, it could temporarily grant the user the fighting class and rank of the person who had dealt the fatal blow to Arcane. This effect would last for 1 minute, copying the skills and rank, but it would drain away 99% of the user's remaining energy when its duration ended. He had never thought he would actually have to resort to using it, but as the executioner prepared to attack again, Shin Junseoh swallowed the stone without hesitation. At that exact moment, the executioner charged towards him, screaming sounds that did not make sense, as if he was not fully conscious of his actions. Shin Junseoh stood still, waiting for the enemy to reach him, and then extended his hand to the side, ready to strike. The executioner shrieked and swung his monstrous blade hand with full force, but the bloodstone's power had already activated within Shin Junseoh. The clash of their attacks erupted in a burst of mana fragments and blinding light. Just then, a system notification appeared, stating that for the next minute, Shin Junseoh's fighting class and rank would be equal to Yoon Taehyun's. The tense and furious executioner was utterly shocked to see his powerful attack blocked so completely and unexpectedly. Shin Junseoh remarked, feeling a strange and powerful surge of energy course through him, that now he finally understood what it felt like to be a true combat-class hunter. Both struggled fiercely to hold back the immense force of their colliding attacks, but the protagonist announced calmly that they were now moving to the second round of their fight. His sword and his body became completely engulfed in intense flames as he activated a powerful explosion skill. That's a wrap. The story continues in my next video. Like and subscribe to stay notified.